Everybody staying healthy?
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody been sick? I haven't been anywhere, so, other than walking around campus. But there's not that many people around. I'm afraid what they're going to say is those of you that have been sick, you can go back to work and the rest of you can't.
That'd be crazy.
No. Everything's upside down backwards.
Would it be crazy, Jack?
Yeah, Brooks, it would. I'm losing money in the stock market right now.
Yeah, join the club.
Open it back up. I'm trying to make some money here.
It's a little nutty.
Hey, Brooks, how about you turn your camera on?
No.
What time is it? Okay, it is noon. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so the test result I thought was fantastic. I took another look at the data a couple days ago, I guess, and the average on the first test that everyone took was around 83, depending on what section you were in. One was 82, one was 84. And the average on the second test was around an 84, so like a 2% improvement in the second test, which I would expect to see on average. And those scores are fantastic, right? So I'm thrilled. Everybody overall right now, I think I only have one person who hasn't logged on, and to be honest, they weren't doing anything before either. So I got one person out of like 70 people taking this class that hasn't done anything since we've gotten online. And like I said, they weren't doing anything before either. So I'm really proud of you for keeping on track and doing what I've asked you to do and doing it well, right? So doing as well as you can do. So keep up the good work, keep up the scores, and I think you'll end up fine. At least that's what I'm hoping. If you're having any problems or you get sick or whatever, you know, you can just reach out, let me know if you need any help in any way. All right.
I've got a question for you, Ms.
Sure,
Wright.
go ahead. No, fine.
With the practice test, you told us that was optional, and then when it went in, my grade went down. I was confused.
It shouldn't be affecting your total score because it's not latched on to anything. Like what I do when I set up your grade book is I set up categories, and it's not in any category. I didn't add it to any category. So I can double check your scores and let you know how they're computed, but I think if you go back, it must have been something else that went in that you.
Okay, yeah, like around the same time or something, maybe. I don't know.
But we can check it. We'll double check it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions before we jump in? All right, if you have questions, just interrupt me. It's no problem. Okay. This week and next week, we're going to be working on something called master budgets, which is just a formal term for a budgeting document. And I would say that a lot of times students tell me this is one of the more challenging areas because there's so many moving parts. I have posted the template for your homework, and I have posted the videos. I think there's 3 of them for you to walk through that. And I also provided, you know, those little panels next to the templates where I started putting the equations right in the template. So hopefully that helps you as well. We'll take a look at that before we close up the class today so you can see it. All right, so let me get started. Oops. There we go. This week, after the class today, you've got between the next, I would spread this out, by the way. Don't wait till Wednesday at 8 o'clock to start this one. spread this one out. It's longer. All right, so maybe do some today, tomorrow, and then wrap it up Wednesday. So complete the homework by Wednesday night. Don't start it Wednesday night. Take the quiz Thursday, and then post those questions for me. Your short answer question Thursday, and then your answer to a short question, same as before, by Friday. So I try to stick with the same deadlines so that you get in a rhythm with it and you can remember. Okay, so like I said, all we're doing this week is learning how to create and prepare a master budget document. We're going to start by creating sales and cost of sales budget, and I'll talk to you about why we start there. So everything is based on your sales forecast, which is why it's so critical that companies get that right. If they don't get their sales forecast right, everything else is going to be off. And so it creates a variance, right? A bigger variance. The more your sales are off, the more you're going to be off, and all the way down through. So it has incredible trickle down. So we always start with that, start with sales. And then of course, cost of sales with the matching principle, it's got to be based on sales. And then we create our selling general administrative expense budget. Okay, so essentially what you're doing first is the income statement, because you need profit. If you think about that, that makes sense. When you go to build your financial statements, you need net income, profit, in order to build the equity statement, retained earnings, and you need retained earnings to build the balance sheet. So that makes sense, right, that you would start there. And then the last thing we're going to do this week is create the cash receipts, cash disbursements, and cash payment, the total cash budget, right? So we'll pull together all the cash pieces. Okay, so a budget is a plan expressed in quantitative terms, that means in numbers, in numeric terms, that specifies how resources will be acquired and used during a specific period of time. So the budgets we're going to do are short-term, meaning up to a year. So we say a short-term budget is up to a year. Companies also prepare longer budgets, so long 5-10-year budgets, but they're less detailed than the next year. So the year out is very detailed. Right. A rolling budget is a budget that is constantly at least a year out. So for every day that goes by, you add a day into the budget. So it's kind of a perpetual 12 months. A lot of companies will do that on a month-to-month basis or on a quarter-to-quarter basis. Right. Then a master budget, as I said, is a comprehensive set of budgets. So for instance, the sales budget, the cost of goods sold budget, the SG&A budget, and so on. So it's a comprehensive set of budgets that covers all phases of the organization for a period of time, up to a year. All right, so these are the components of the budget. As I said, the operating budget is sales, production, direct materials and labor, overhead, the selling general administrative pieces. So that's your first step. We're going to walk through that in this week assignment. A capital budget is a long-term budget that shows planned acquisitions of property, plant, and equipment. I'm not going to have you do one of those this time. If you major in accounting, I'll make you do that in the next class, okay? A financial budget is a schedule that outlines how the organization will acquire financial resources, such as borrowing additional money from the bank, or if they're a big enough company, through bonds and sale of stock. And then the cash budget, I will have you do. The cash budget details expected receipts, so I'll have you do that in a budget, in the schedule, and disbursement, so I'll have you do that in another schedule. And then I'll have you pull that together to give you a total cash budget. And then this last piece, budgeted financial statements, is the last thing you do when you do the master budget. And I'll do that next week. So I think it'll be enough for us to get through the operating budget and the cash budget this week. That's plenty. Okay, so sales, like I said earlier, is always, this is critical, first budget, always the first budget, and every other budget is based on that budget. So if you make changes in your sales budget, it ripples all the way through the whole thing. So that's why it's so important to have a good budgeting software so you can tinker with various values that you put in and they roll right through. So we're going to set our budgets up like that in Excel. where all the pieces are interconnected. So if you do make a change in one area, it will carry through and get captured in other areas. So like I said earlier, it's really important to make sure sales is right, because that's where you get started. And a company's sales forecast would include or be based on a lot of things. Would also consider general economic and industry trends, and managers have to make certain assumptions. For instance, what rate do we expect GDP to grow, and how does that affect our company? If we're a regional company, what's the growth rate we expect in our region, and how do we expect our company to perform in that region? So there's all kinds of assumptions that go into building a budget. It's not an easy task, right? So based on that budget, like I said earlier, they develop these operational budgets. And it helps them figure out what they've got to do in order to meet the demand, how many employees they got to have, how many orders of raw materials they got to make. Right? It's very detailed. So after they get that done, then they know where the money's coming from and where it's going to go to. So then they can figure out, oh crap, if things go as we plan, we're going to run out of cash in July. Let's say you're a startup company. It very frequently happens where you run out of cash because you're making investments in working capital and you're growing really quickly. So you got to figure out ahead of time where you're going to get that cash. You can't fly by the seat of your pants, right? So it's another really important reason why we do budgets, is so we got to feel for, based on our expectations, this is what we're going to need to borrow for money, and we can start working on that ahead of time. Really helpful. All right, so I gave you this slide to help you get an idea of what the order is when you're putting the budgets together. And you'll see a question like this on either the test or the quiz. So sales budget's always first. That has to be. So it's important to get this right, because all the rest of these follow and are based on what's in sales. So from sales, we can then figure out, okay, if we know what our sales are going to be, how much coffee do we need to roast, right? Or how much inventory do we need to have on hand to make sure we got 30 days of inventory? And so that all those pieces factor in, all the ratios and everything you've been working on all semester, all kind of come together in this final piece. Okay, and then from that, you can figure out what's cost of goods sold, again, based on sales. You got to use a matching principle to figure this out. And then SG&A, we've been working with this, the actual results for SG&A. We've been working with our company example. So those are the things like the promotion and selling expense and other types of costs, the web page, the electricity, and so on and so forth, that aren't related to manufacturing. That's what's in SG&A. All right, and then once you get all that done, you can do a cash budget. So from these budgets, you know what you're going to have for money coming in from your customers. You know what you got to spend to buy inventory, buy raw materials, to pay your employees, to pay your utility bill, and everything else. So you can figure out what cash coming in, what cash is going out. And then once you get that done, once you get that done, you can then do the budgeted financial statements. So like I said, this week, we're going to go all the way to here. And next week, we'll do these budgeted financial statements and a few other pieces too. I'm going to have you do the ratios again for 2020. So that's what you're budgeting. Remember the actual data I gave you 8 years. We had from 2012 to 2019. You're going to be budgeting for 2020. So that's the numbers you're going to be creating. And then we wrap it all together. I think it really helps us tie all the things we've done all semester together. So it's just a wonderful way to end the class. All right, so I talked earlier about the importance of the sales forecast. These are just some things that I would want you to think about. If you get out there, you're going to be involved in budgeting. Any company you work for is going to ask everybody to get involved in the budgeting process. So of course, past sales levels and trends. So when we do our 2020 budget for the coffee company, we're going to base our estimate on last year's, and we're going to forecast out a certain growth rate for the year. So past sales levels and trends in the economy, the region, the firm, the industry are important. General economic trends. So of course, this is an absolutely insane environment that we're operating in now. First time I've ever seen anything like this. First time you folks have ever seen anything like this. So I can't imagine how that company's doing. I'm sure they're shut down, right? So how many months are they going to be shut down? It could, this company operates on such small margins, it could create a real problem for them. Just being shut down for a month could send them over the edge. That's why it's so important to know what your break-even point is, right? And so it's so important to have about 6 months back in cash to make sure you got enough money to get through a rough time. More important than ever right now. Geopolitical issues that might arise. Obviously for a coffee company, it shouldn't be a big problem, but this one is pandemic risk, other legal or legislative regulations. So for instance, right now they're trying to give small businesses loans and loan forgiveness. So giving them money and also not requiring them to make payments is going to be critical for them. Pricing policy. So if you remember when we talked to Brad, he said they hadn't changed their prices much in a very long time. So that's their policy, right? They would change the price. So I'm going to ask you to keep the price constant as well, mostly for simplicity purposes. How much advertising and promotion we want to do. Expected actions of our competitors. So if you remember, Brad was talking about a new coffee roasting business that got set up in Charleston. Expected new products or processes, and new market research information. So these are just some of the things that go into making an accurate sales forecast. Okay. So usefulness of a budget, several purposes. Of course, it helps us figure out what do we need to order this year for beans, right? How many beans do we need to order? How often are we going to order them? How many employees do we need working for us? When do we need them? And then evaluating how things are going. So we've got a benchmark now. When we have a budget, we've got a benchmark to use. We can break it into 12 months. We can break it into 12 months and then see where we're progressing. So are we making our sales budget? Are we overpaying our employees? Like where do we stand regardless to what we planned? So it's a benchmark of comparison. We can compare the plan, the budget, to the actual results. Those are called variances. All right, so there's some critical computations that you're going to see me make, and these are the ones I see most students get tripped up on. So when you're calculating sales, you need to know what's the forecasted number of units that I expect to sell and what's the forecasted sales price. So unit times price is how you calculate sales. And you'd have to do that for every type of product line that you have. So if you remember the last assignment you did a few weeks ago, I had you calculate weighted average units. And that's what we're going to use here is just the weighted average units. And then we'll break it back down into product line. So if we meaning the same portion of wholesaling, the same portion of retailing, the same portion of cafe sales, then we can just roll out those weighted average numbers. You'll see what I mean when you walk through the assignment. The other one that students get tripped up on is the second one here. So you have to go through a computation to get the number of units to be produced. And what you start with there is the number of sales units, same units here as here. And so that's why you got to start with sales. And then you add to that whatever your desired ending inventory is for that item. So if it's for roasted beans, if you want to have 90 days of ending inventory, what does that mean? How much money do you have to invest to have 90 days of raw beans? Okay, so I show you how to walk through that computation, and then you subtract off whatever your anticipated beginning inventory is, because you certainly don't need to produce something that you already have. All right, so if you've already got an inventory of roasted beans here, you don't need to make them. And so you can back that out of the number you need to produce to meet your sales forecast. So one more time, to get the number of units produced, take the number of units sold, this is forecast from here, add to that whatever you want to have left in desired ending inventory. So this is what you want to have available, and then you can subtract what you already have, because you don't need to make what you already have, right? All right, so that's a formula you'll see crop up a couple times in the budget. All right, I got just a couple of slides left. This one talks about budget administration. So most smaller companies like the one we're working with, it's fairly informal process, right? Usually the accountant puts it together and works with the chief, work with the owner, in this case, Brad, to get that all put together for the year. And I'm not even sure Brad does the budget, to be honest, right? But it would certainly be a suggested improvement if he doesn't do one. It's a really important document to help you understand what's going on and what you're going to have for cash. In contrast, larger organizations all use budgeting to help them plan and execute their strategies. And it's quite formal. Right? So there's a formal process to collect the data and prepare the master budget. And they usually designate a budget director or chief budget officer to do that. Okay, so to communicate the budget procedures and deadlines to employees throughout the organization, the budget director often develops what's called a budget manual. And that manual spells out who is responsible for what pieces and what form that information is supposed to take. I could have added, oh yeah, I did already. When, like time. When is that piece required? Because usually the budgeting process starts in the fall of every year and is done by the end of November so that it's in place before the new year starts. The budget committee, so every large publicly traded company has a budget committee who consists of senior executives, top people in the organization, and they're often appointed by, this committee will appoint the budget director, and they're part of the board of directors. So that these people in the budget committee have final say on the approval of the budget. So the budget director just puts it together and is in charge of leading the effort to put it together, but the budget committee is responsible for giving final approval. And these are people that are on the board of directors. Okay, so it's at the highest level of the organization for a publicly traded company that this happens. And then this is another area of budgeting that often happens. When I teach my graduate level management accounting class, it's really fun because a lot of them have experienced this already. And so the stories they have to tell about experiences they've had with budgetary slack are really fascinating. Anyway, what this is where a company has people that are involved in the budget process and they underestimate revenues. So they budget less than they expect for revenues so that when the numbers come in and they're better than that, they think it makes them look good. Okay, which can be a result of having improper incentive systems. I'll talk more about that in a second. Or the other way they can pad the budget is they overestimate what the expenses are going to be. Then the actuals come in and they're less than that, so they look good again, right? So underestimating revenues or overestimating expenses can be done to pad the budget. Let me give you another example of what I'm talking about when I say incentive systems can cause these problems. I learned recently that hospitals are told that if they indicate somebody has COVID-19, if they've been diagnosed with that, they get a certain amount of money. And then if somebody dies and they indicate it's COVID-19, they get even more money. So there's some indication that what's happening out there is that some people, some medical professionals are saying that they're COVID-19 deaths when in fact they really weren't. Or there may have been a relationship, but there may have been some other underlying condition that actually caused their death. And so you have to be super careful. This happens all the time when you're doing budgeting. What you measure, like what you're measuring in your budget and what you reward people for often is what gets done, right? So you got to be super careful how you set things up and what you put out in front of people. Keep in mind, these hospitals have been asked to completely shut down all their elective surgeries. So they're losing money hand over fist. So if you stick that carrot under their nose and say, we'll give you more money if you say it's a COVID-19 death, you can bet your bottom dollar that's what they're going to say. Does that make sense? You guys there? You're all on mute.
Yes, ma'am. That
Yes,
makes
ma'am.
sense.
And we're all here.
Yeah. So you got to be super careful with that, your budgeting. Right. So one of the ways to, let me finish what this is, and then I'll talk about ways to fix it. All right, so that difference between the revenues and expenses is called the slack. And then why do people do it? Is mostly so that the performance is perceived differently. Then, you know, like they look favorable. So if they come in at higher revenues than they budgeted, that looks good. Or if they come in at lower expenses than they budgeted, that looks good, right? And maybe there's some incentive systems where people get a bonus if they come in over, under budget, whatever way they're being measured, right? So if you come in over in profits, that's perceived as good, and maybe you get a bonus for that. You have to be super careful about how you set that up, because you're going to get the kind of behaviors that you measure. Right, so that's how a lot of manipulation occurs within companies, is because of the budgeting issues. This is a really important topic. I talk a lot more about it in the next class up, my 302 class, junior level class. I talk a lot about it in my graduate level class as it happens. And it's one of the reasons why things get manipulated, numbers get manipulated. Right, so another reason why companies or people do it is because they're not sure, they don't have enough confidence in their numbers. And so they over and underestimate to deal with that, because they're not exactly sure where things are going to be, right? So another one is a lot of companies, this happens in the state a lot, and the federal government too. Let's say things aren't going really well, and we've got to make some cuts across the board. So that's how companies will do it. They think that's the fair way to do it, is to just make cuts across the board. So people pad the budget because they know that they're going to get caught. So that's a bad culture. It's a bad way to run the business. You're better off making some targeted cuts and making people justify why they should maintain their budget, as opposed to just doing across the board cuts. All right. So these are some of the ideas for solving slack, because it can cause all kinds of problems. For instance, if you underestimate sales, I told you about 10 times already that we start with sales. So if you screw up sales, you're going to screw up everything. That means you're not going to have enough inventory, you're not going to have enough people, you're not going to plan for enough resources, you're not going to have enough cash. It's going to cripple, right, the organization if you screw this up, because you're going to mess up all these resource allocation and all your planning. So it's really important that we don't have this budgetary slack problem. Okay, so one of the solutions is avoid relying on the budget is a negative evaluation tool. So it's like I was saying, don't set up the wrong incentives. And also allow some managerial discretion. So if there's a reason for them to go over in their expenses, or if there's a reason for them to be under in their revenues that makes sense, right? So let them, give them some slack when it comes to uncertainty. Okay? Use the budget as a way to punish people. And then give incentives for achieving and providing accurate projections, as opposed to coming over, like getting a higher profit. Don't give an incentive for getting a higher profit, because that automatically creates slack. Give incentives to come in on target. All right, then avoid across the board cuts. Like I said, use more targeted approach. And then this one I think is the coolest one to use, is participative budgeting. So let's say you're involved in making that sales forecast and you're in the sales department. Bring in some other people from other areas to serve as sort of a kind of a watchdog in a way for making sure that the estimates that are being put forward are reasonable. Okay. All right, so that's all I had. I wanted to jump over and show you the template real quick, and show you where you have to work in the template and where we're going this week. So hang on, let me switch gears. Okay, so can you see the Excel okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. All right, so this is your first tab. So there's your directions. It says complete all bright blue tabs. So that's these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tabs. That's all you have to do this week. All right, you'll need these red tabs to build some of these blue tabs, and you'll need this light green tab to build some of these blue tabs. And then the week after, we're going to be working on these green tabs. So you're going to be doing that. There's a bunch of them there. And then that pretty much wraps up the semester. All right, so this is starting off, of course, with sales. And so we're going to be using the 2019 budget that you had. So this was, sorry, the 2019 actuals that we had. This is what you've been working with right from the get-go. That's the number from 2 weeks ago when you had that previous homework assignment. We're going to grow sales out at 5%. So we're just going to factor in a 5% sales growth. And then we're going to roll that across the different customers we have. So we're going to use the same sales mix. And I spell out all those assumptions here. So they're all spelled out. And then when you go through the video, I talk about it in much greater detail. So you got that one to do. You got the SG&A budget to do. Selling general administrative. You got roasting. So you're doing just the yellow parts. I put in these green boxes to show you how to do it. So you can either watch, I really want you to watch the videos because I talk you through what's going on here. If you just follow these, you're not going to get the context. And so I talk a lot about the connections with your prior assignments and what you're doing here. So for instance, these values came right off those graphs you created when you did the variable and fixed cost graphs a couple of weeks ago. That's where these are coming from. So you'll hear me talk a lot about where the number's coming from, why you're doing what you're doing, how it all interconnects, what's important and what's not important. You'll hear me walk you through that in the video. So highly recommend that. And then just use these as kind of backup to help you if you need to pause the video and slow it down or something. All right, so then here's cash receipts, just the money coming in. Here's cash disbursements, just the money going out. And then here's pulling it together. This is money in, money out, total change, beginning of the year balance. Notice that that's the end of 2019 is the beginning of 2020 and ending balance in cash. Right? And then we'll do the financial statements next week and wrap things up with the ratios and close it all up. Okay, for homework?
Sounds good.
Yep.
That's good.
All right, let me go back to my slides real quick. Okay, so here's what we got to do this week, right? You got that all in your planner?
Yes, ma'am.
So you got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday stuff, or your due dates. Okay, so that's all I have. How about you? You got questions or concerns or anything I can do to help?
I don't think so.
No, ma'am, I don't think so.
Think you're pretty good shape? How's the online learning holding up for you overall? Are you doing okay?
Maintaining.
Okay.
Getting close to the end.
Yes, that's right.
Just
Yep.
want to play golf.
Hey, Will.
I
Have
hear
you
you.
heard anything about going to pass fail or no?
There's been some conversations about it, but most of the faculty don't want to do it. There's complications. For instance, with ROTC, there can't be any pass-fail grades. And for scholarships of certain kinds, there can't be pass-fail grades. And for some students, they've been really working their butts off to get better grades, and they need to improve their GPAs for scholarships or other reasons, right? So
Yeah.
complicated. It's
Yeah.
really complicated. The other problem, I don't want to go to pass fail because I just see that causing about 60% of my class to disengage. And I just don't see it as being valuable. I'd rather, in my opinion, I'd rather make what I'm giving you really doable, that if you put in some time, you're going to get it, everything's going to go well for you. And I see that happening. People are getting things done. You did really well on the test. So that's what I'd rather see. I'd rather see you earn it, but make it doable. Well, I understand that might not always happen. But I'd rather deal with exceptions than the rule. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anything else? All right, as usual, I'm home working every day. So if you need anything at all, just reach out and let me know. And I'll get back to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Sounds good. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yep. Have a good week.